Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of K9s Talking Sense. I'm your host, Cameron Ford, and on this episode, I wanted to get into a deeper discussion about explosives. So nobody better to talk to in most cases other than my friend Todd Wilber from Precision Explosives. Todd, thank you for coming on to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Cameron. I appreciate the opportunity to come back.
So for people who maybe not heard the first episode we did together, just give us a little quick rundown again of like what your background is and what you do now.
I became a military bomb technician in 1991 and was later selected to become a member of the United States Army Delta Force as a bomb technician. Later in my career, I went to work for two of the national laboratories, Los Alamos and Lawrence Livermore National Lab. Primarily, I worked in nuclear counterterrorism, but I got a chance to do some original research on the initiation properties of PETN. Later, I also got a chance to do some scummy contract work for State Department, which led me to Afghanistan, where I lived and worked with Afghans. I was the only Westerner in my house, and we worked on literally hundreds of IEDs and destroyed thousands of pounds of homemade explosives and ordnance. I went on to, after Afghanistan, I went to New Mexico Tech, where I'm adjunct faculty, and did some original research with some grad students on TATP and HMTD. My wife and I formed Precision Explosives in 2018, and we've been trying to answer the needs of our customers ever since.
Perfect. So tell us a little bit about Precision Explosives. What is it that you guys do specifically with your company, and what things you kind of offer to people that are maybe a client of yours?
Well, we started off as Precision Explosives, and that we thought that we would just be selling explosives and magazines and the like. And it turns out there isn't a huge market for this, but we tried to simply answer the needs of our customers. And so when customers said, hey, we would really like to have a non-detonable training aid that is inexpensive, easy to deploy, then we created the Odor prints. And Odor prints have since grown outside of explosives into narcotics and bed bugs, electronics, cadaver, and basically if there's a need for it, if you ask for it, then we'll do our best to solve the problem.
So that brings up a great starting point then. What is a odor print? How does it work? And is it real odor, or is this a mimic or synthetic?
Great question. And I'm glad you asked. We get that question quite often. It is not a pseudo. It is actual real odor. If you're dealing with explosives, propellants, and oxidizers, it's pulverized material that is desensitized using cellulose. And your dog is experiencing the actual real material. It just can't detonate. It can't have an energetic reaction. If you're dealing with narcotics, we are close partners with GetSet, and we infuse the odor of controlled substances into GetSet material in various form factors. Odor prints are one form factor is a 3-inch disc that has paw prints cut out, and it's riveted together with rare earth magnets. In the narcotics and anything other than explosives, we have it looks like a dog bone with 4 or 2 paw prints cut out, depending on whether you're dealing with a mini or regular size. And that, of course, has rare earth magnets. We chose the materials very carefully in that we don't want you to have to proof off of any of the materials that make up odor prints. So cellulose is in the background in our everyday environment. It's in paper, it's in bark, it's in grass. Cellulose is everywhere. Aluminum is what we use for the metal to sandwich the material together. Of course, that's background. There's aluminum everywhere. We use aluminum rivets, and then rare earth magnets are coated in chrome, and they don't really have much in the way of a unique odor. And we package everything in 2 metallized Mylar bags to prevent cross-contamination. With the get scent material, we can provide studies that show that the material itself has almost no background odor whatsoever. And we infuse with controlled substances that are what are called certified reference materials. What that means is that if somebody were to turn in their dope for analysis, that instrument has to be calibrated with the purest form of whatever that controlled substance is. And that's what we start with. So on the front of all of our controlled substances, except for marijuana, you'll have a QR code, and that will take you, if you scan it, it will take you to the certificate of analysis for that parent odor. And all of them are 99.9% pure.
So that leads to, I kind of got a question from what you described. So the setup or how you have the explosive training aids is different than how you guys do the narcotic training aids. Is that correct?
It is presently, we're shifting to all get set material. So we're shifting from the not deadables to using all get sent for the explosives. We want to characterize these this transition with measurements using gas chromatograph mass spectrometer. We want to look at longevity. We want to look at how it really works before we just blanketly, just do an overnight flip the switch thing and switch to that material. So we want to do our homework first, and that's where we are.
So with trying to think how I want to word this. So polymers have come up more frequently, as you mentioned, the Get Scent company. And with polymers, there has been, I guess, research and data collected that depending on the chemical, how the polymer takes it in. Can you explain that a little bit better? Because I've had other, I just had Dr. Katie Sloan on. Me and Derek Copeland were just talking the other night about this. And what are the pros and cons to polymers? And when it comes to materials, like, does every chemical absorb the exact same way? Does it off-gas the exact same way? What happens when we absorb or impregnate odor to a polymer like a Get Scent tube?
We would love it if it worked universally on all different types of odors, but depending on the chemical properties of whatever the target odor is that you're trying to infuse or impregnate, it may adhere and absorb differently. With Get Scent, the idea is that it will absorb and then off gas at the same vapor pressure at the same rate as what it would if it were the actual material in front of you. But we have found that there are some materials, specifically with some of the cadaver odors, that don't necessarily absorb quite the way we would like for them to, but we're still exploring what those limitations are.
Okay, go ahead.
I was recently asked if higher vapor pressure odors would expire sooner than lower vapor pressure odors. So, for example, nitroglycerin has a pretty high vapor pressure compared to RVX. Yep. So, yes, the answer is the nitroglycerin is going to go away faster than RVX. What we try to do to mitigate that or improve the lifespan of the training aid is we advise people, don't touch it with your bare hands. Use a glove, use tongs, use something so that you're not putting your unique odor on the training aid. But also, as soon as you're finished with it, put it back in the metallized Mylar bag that it comes in and burp the air out. So there's really no place for that odor to go once it's in storage. And with that material, we get about 155 hours of useful work.
So that kind of answers the question I was going to ask is, how long do these last for, and can it change? So basically, like you're saying is, okay, you gave the answer 155 hours. So I put this out today and I run for 4 hours training. So it's in the environment that I have set up. So obviously it's degrading, it's losing 4 hours of time. Would that be correct? Okay. And then in that, like you mentioned, we don't want to touch it with our hands for the concern of taking on my scent to that. But what about if I have it in whatever I store? I set up my training today and I stick it between a door jamb and it's been sitting there for 4 hours. Is it now going to also pick up things from the door jamb that I now have to be concerned with potentially? How do we mitigate that risk?
So the way we package the get set material, it's in between pieces of aluminum. If the dog comes in contact with it, you drop it, you step on it, you touch it, you can clean it off. You can clean it off with water, you can clean it off with isopropyl alcohol. Um, the get set material does two things. One, it starts with adhesion. So the odor sticks to the outside of it. Over time, it absorbs. So the odor itself is actually inside the material. And over time, then it allows that odor to be released or off gas. So it's not necessarily a coating of odor on the outside. It's actually inside the material.
So then how do I prevent or am I able to prevent that from absorbing in the environment that I put it in? So like I was saying, is if I put it in the door jamb, for lack of a better example, will it also in that 4 hours start picking up the materials, let's say the glue, the adhesion, the wood, maybe the lacquer? Is that going to happen when I put that out?
We haven't seen that. That's not to say it's not possible, but we haven't experienced that where it's taken on a high vapor pressure contaminant, if you will. I'm not saying it's impossible. We just have not measured that. We haven't seen that yet.
Okay. With now, let's just say I'm the, average Joe dog trainer handler. I have my tube. And in this case, let's just say I got the tubes more so than the dog bone style. Um, and I put that, in this case, the actual get set tube out. Great. But then I throw it back in my bag of narcotics because in my mind, I'm like, ooh, I want to keep reabsorbing. I want it to be super strong. What's your advice on that technique of the thought process being that, oh, if I put it back with my whatever the substance is, it'll refresh it in a way is probably the best way I can describe it. What's the truth to that? Or what information should we be thinking about when doing that?
I don't think that it hurts as long as it's the same odor that you started with. So if that started off as cocaine and you put it back in cocaine, then that's probably okay. I in discussions with the folks that make Get Scent, it does not take on additional odors like that. So you can't continue to recharge it. You can't, like a soap, you can't continue to recharge it. Once it's absorbed fully all of the odor that it can take on, then it liberates those. It has to be cleaned completely to recharge again. And basically it's cost effective for you to do that. It's cheaper to just buy it.
Okay. So then in this case, how do we, and I know you get this question all the time, how do we document what this is? So for my training records, especially narcotics handlers, how do I annotate this? Because in our world, we've always annotated things via the weight of the substance. And in this case, I don't have weight. I just have a tube that's off-gassing odor. And it sounds like magic to me as this handler, right? So how do we document for training purposes in our training records that could be examined legally? What do I do and how do I explain it for that documentation purpose?
So, I think the last time we talked, we discussed surface area. And really, surface area is more important than weight because that's what is being presented. I can have a tube that's a half-inch in diameter and infinitely long, but you're still only getting the surface area of that half-inch diameter opening. So the same thing occurs with the tubes and with the odor prints. And so what we've done is we've physically calculated out the surface area of the tubes, of the odor prints, and then measured powders and replicated the same surface area in a weigh boat on top of a scale. So we've matched the surface area of a powder of the same density as cocaine, and we know that a tube is about 2 grams. A mini odor print is about 10 grams, and a regular sized odor print is about 20 grams. And then a turning a delivery device TAD is somewhere in between the 10 and 20 gram mark.
What makes it different with a TAD then?
We're looking at the surface area of the opening. So the regular odor print has two sides, and if you look at the total surface area of the opening of the TAD, then it's a little bit more than a mini, not quite as much as a regular size.
Would that make a difference even though the get sent tube within the TAD is only the same, is only a very specific surface area? What would really make it that much different? I can see what you're talking about when it comes to the dog bone style aids that you guys have, and then the paw prints kind of create the surface area that's what's available. But with a TAD, if I have a get sent tube, my get sent tube doesn't change. It's the same size. Though, like you said, the mouth of the TAD is obviously its size. Just for the sake of those that need to kind of visualize or kind of understand I don't know if say the chemistry is the right word, but what's happening is like you're saying, the availability of the odor is controlled by the opening of the TAD, despite the size of the get sent tube. So what I'm trying to illustrate here in my mind is my get sent tube is only so big. So whether the get sent tube was out next to the TAD, technically the same surface area exists. Is that correct? Or how would you explain it differently?
So inside the TAD, the get sent tube has to off gas at a certain vapor pressure, whatever the vapor pressure was of the original odor. So it then fills up the inside of the TAD with odor. And once it reaches equilibrium, it then is able to push through the semi-permeable membrane. And it's going to push through all at the same time, as opposed to just simply going straight up from the tube through the membrane. Mm-hmm. So it's going to fill the volume of the jar and slowly push through.
Got it. And then you bring up this next part of this. So the TADs have a membrane. Can you explain how the membrane works and what is its advantage or disadvantage if you are that new handler that just doesn't really know what this thing is? And again, how does somebody who's new at this explain what sounds like magic to everybody else?
So the TAD is a really cool tool in that it helps keep whatever you put inside from being contaminated. So yes, odor can go in the TAD, odor comes out of the TAD. What doesn't transfer back and forth through that membrane is liquid or solids. And the membrane has some level of porosity, so it does have tiny little holes. It does allow odor to pass through that, but the holes are small enough that it doesn't allow for particles or liquids to pass through it. So it's a great tool for keeping your odors fresher longer. It's also fantastic if you're dealing with powders. So even if you don't use odor prints or get set tubes, you want to use alkyl fentanyl, you want to use alkyl potassium chlorate, those kinds of things, please put them in a TAD. It's probably the safest way to handle a lot of those things and eliminates mess.
Especially potassium chlorate, because that powder. I mean, I've even seen it get through the TAD.
It's nasty.
Yeah.
It's very nasty.
Crazy stuff.
And with on potassium chlorate, just if I can go off on a tangent for a second, please be careful with these powders. Potassium chlorate is a respiratory irritant. So don't put your face up next to potassium chlorate. It's going to make your sinuses kind of go nuts. In Afghanistan, I didn't have any cool equipment to do all these testing things. So sometimes I would simply have to hold the powder near my face. And I found that potassium chlorate would irritate my sinuses, but ammonium nitrate wouldn't. So I could quickly assess, just kind of I think that's what this is. And then we would test it later under better circumstances. But these chemicals are toxic in most cases. So please be careful in handling them. All of your odors. Nitroglycerin is a bad one. When you open up that container, let it just air out a second before you stick your face over it. And if you're going to handle Unimax, nitroglycerin-based dynamite, always use gloves and minimize your contact because the nitroglycerin will actually go through your nitrile gloves and into your skin, and you'll give yourself a nitro headache. Yeah. The other powders, like for example, black powder, you have to really be careful with it. Again, this is a great use of the TAD because it can help to contain those powders and keep things safer.
So when it comes to TADs, I've had, just in my experience of traveling around the world and working with various different teams, there has been, in some cases, struggle with dealing with the dogs paying attention to the TAD. I know specifically, and I can't remember if you saw it or not, it might have been shared with you, but the Alaska State Troopers, in order to train with fentanyl, use the fentanyl soak, or the TAD with the fentanyl get sent tubes inside of it. And through that, they ran into the issue of the dogs are paying attention to the TAD, especially when they work through the experimental phase and testing phase. Can you address what's happening in that case? Because they're definitely not the only ones we had the same issue in LAPD and some other ones where they started pulling back on the use of the TADs because the dogs were really honing in on the TAD. Now the thought process was, and I remember talking to Dr. Michelle Mon, but I'm a little, hazy on the actual recollection of what was the answer, but I know it had something to do with the seal, if I'm not mistaken. So can you explain just what's happening to the dogs that are paying attention to the TAD now? I know training wise, your goal in Alaska State Troopers definitely did this. They were proofing through the TADs, but the issue was it was so strong, and it was some dogs, the amount of work they had to do to get the dog not to pay attention to the TAD was pretty intense. So their end of report was they would rather just kind of use the tubes than the tubes with the TAD, or keep the use of the TAD at a very minimal. So can you kind of expand upon that for us?
So the TADs are not, they're not odor free. They do have a seal that is a specific type of chemical. And I know Michelle worked very hard at understanding exactly what the materials are and what their odor properties are. She goes to great lengths. You even look at what NASA's data is on how certain chemicals will off gas. And I think that this is something that she feels is the best that she can do in maintaining the seal integrity, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't have odor. I'm sure it is unique. So proofing off from the TADs is very important. But I can understand the concern. We've seen, some dogs I've actually heard some of your podcasts where people have talked about how sometimes dogs just like a specific odor. And it could be that the odor of that seal was very appealing to some dogs, or the material that's used in the plastic, the black part that holds the semi-permeable membrane in place. So it could be that the dogs just really like that odor. Could be very appealing, but we hope that they focus more on target odor. But yes, I understand the issue.
So it's just good information for people that use TADs, just to be aware that, like anything else, there's pros and cons to it, and proofing is a must. But at the same time, be careful about the repeated use or the exclusive repeated use of that, just because of potentially with some dogs may really start attaching some type of connection to reinforcement to that TAD versus what we had hoped would be the target odor. So that's an important piece there. Now, there's another thing. It's a good, like a discussion point that's happening more and more. So two things I want to get into, which is 3D printing and Kong. And as you might have seen just in the past 24 hours, Justin Rigney made a post asking the question about Kong and various trainers that utilize that. Now, obviously, most of us over here know that the use of Kong to teach detection isn't as popular in the United States like it is in Europe. In Europe, it is very popular. But with that said, there's also legal considerations that are different. But my question to you about this is, have you guys tested a Kong just to see what's in it, what's about it? I shared some information that I learned from Dr. Nathan Hall, which is various dog toy companies also like to add chemicals to these toys to make it more desirable, wanted, elicit certain things in the dog. But has there been any actual testing of what's in it? Because there's even somebody in the comments that said, "Oh, the Kong is unique. There's nothing else in the environment that has these chemicals." And but what is the truth to that? Has anybody really even tested Kongs? And then the other part of that was, just do that part first. We'll get back to 3D printing in a second. Go ahead.
So I don't know the answer to that. We haven't tested Kongs for what their odor properties are. I do recall somebody saying that they had tested, and that would be a good one to search on Google Scholar to see if somebody has actually characterized that particular odor. But I'm certain that somebody has done that and done some comparisons of various toy rewards and unique odor, but we haven't done that.
Yeah, it's a great conversation to have, and I was glad Justin brought it up. I talk about it frequently when I travel and do things, and then at the end of the day, it kind of comes into what part of the world are you in, what legal ramifications on there, what safety things, because for some they're just like, oh, it's a Kong, no big deal, but the things that we looked at, obviously the bomb world is, am I going to shut down a whole area just because the dog alerted to something? But my trainer, Natalie, also brought up the very good point, which was, as we were like just discussing all this openly, was it's funny that in this case, we get really focused about the toy, but yet in many other aspects, whether someone's using a tennis ball or a towel or a tug toy, and they're teaching their dogs at beginning stages, just searching for the primary reward, that we're not up in arms as much about that as we are about the Kong. And part of it, I think, is related to the social media influence of it all. You have your trainers who are doing a very deliberate style training methodology, working from sizes of piece of Kong down to like super small pieces, which you don't see as often when someone's teaching a dog to find, the very beginning, they're hiding the tennis ball, they're hiding a tug toy, they're doing whatever. So I think there's a history difference. Like there's lots and lots of reps of a Kong under one context and only so many reps of a toy in the other context. But it's just a unique discussion point that happens, that I like you're bringing up. I think there needs to be some more research into this, like specifically, let's say the Kong, because that's probably the most popular reward item, whether it be working dogs and or sport dogs, people like the Kong item. So I might have to ask Dr. Tiedemann about that. I might have to say to her, hey, can you look into this? Or if you guys get time, it'd be super awesome if you did it and had some feedback about what is in a Kong and what makes it different. I know there's different densities for sure. I know black versus red versus blue. Those are big things that what made Kong. Certain ones float, certain ones don't, certain ones are stronger. And again, added to that point, the information that Dr. Hall shared about additives brought into certain toys to sell more toys, kind of thing. So,
Right.
as people are listening to this, there's, just be thoughtful about what you're doing versus just doing it because we see, whether it be social media or we see another trainer do something and we haven't really put thought into why we're doing it that way. Simon Prince did a really good response, which I wholeheartedly agree on, which is, why it came about, who's been using it for how long, but there's not enough information. And when you look at it from a trainer's point of view, if I'm going to put that much work into training to find a reward, why not at a sooner stage just transfer it? Like my thought process, I told Gregory years ago, man, if you could just make a toy out of the get set material, then you can actually have some really cool scented toys to start with that accomplish the same thing, right? It's the toy material that the dog's playing with is also filled with odor, so you can accomplish two things. Go ahead.
We actually did that. Some folks presented to us, I think it was David Reese, who said, hey, the customs method of training dogs is to soak these towels in that target odor and then play games with the dog and then swap out the next towel, the next towel, the next towel. And well, how can we do this? And what my wife Chrissy came up with is these large wool dryer balls, and we cut a hole in the dryer ball, and we were able to put a get scent tube, obviously that had been had odor, and we put a get scent tube in the ball, and we were able to play fetch with her little mountain feist. And after about an hour, that dog could find gunshot residue. It found my gun. It found shell casings. In fact, on one of the throws, the get scent tube came out of the ball, and the dog went over and found the get scent tube by itself.
So I
So
like that. So, yeah, we need to basically make something that the get scent tubes can go in, and that becomes the toy.
that's what we did with the dryer balls. Is we just cut a hole in it, and we sent out some to a few people, and I think it included maybe a dozen or 20 balls already pre-cut, and then you just get whatever tubes you want, and when you're done with that day's worth of work and all the balls are dirty, you just run them in a hot water cycle and in the washer and start all over.
So those dryer balls do not have any significant odor or fragrance to them?
No, they're not scented.
Okay.
So
But they would have their own unique smell, right? Just because of whatever it's made out of.
yeah, it's gonna have its own unique odor, of course. But the dog was experiencing what was in the tube, which was in the ball. Will the dog find the wool ball? Of course. But the dog was also finding shell casings in a gun, which is what we wanted the dog.
And that goes back to the point of, a guy was sharing with everybody, when you use what we call pairing or simultaneous conditioning, if you go that route, the true thing that I learned over all the years of doing it that way and then switching to delayed conditioning, and now I use whatever the dog needs to do most. But the main thing that I really kind of focus in on is as little as possible, as much as necessary. So for whatever dog, if I have a highly motivated dog, I don't need to do that process of pairing for too long. The dog, like you said, is highly motivated to go do the thing and says, I like this. So that's super helpful. But a dog who's maybe less motivated, I may have to do the reps more frequently or for a longer period of time just to get that connection. But then, like to anything that we do, we would then need to go through a proofing cycle just to make sure the dog is clear about what it is it's paying attention to and what it is it's getting reinforcement for. And that really helps out that concept. Now I know I want to get to that 3D printing part of it. So 3D printing is getting more and more popular and becoming, I would say, slightly more cost effective for those. It's becoming reasonable for a person to buy a 3D printer and make stuff out of it. Now, with that said, I've been asked a few times because now people are starting to make detection items out of 3D printed material. And I already know various plastics do various things. And I've had conversations with other scientists, and the jury's kind of still out as to pros and cons to this concept. And there's obviously the pros of it can be made very simply and easily. We don't have to go to a manufacturer. If someone has this, you can crank these things out. Have you seen, or is there anything to be concerned about when it comes to 3D printing, 3D plastics? What should we be thinking of? What should we be aware of when it comes to that?
So we've developed a subsidiary company that does rapid prototyping, and they actually have they call it a 3D printing farm. They have about 20 machines where they can do all kinds of different 3D printing. And what we've learned is the filament that's used in 3D printing can vary significantly, and that's where you're going to have to be concerned. You can 3D print with things that have a tremendous amount of odor that are very fragile. My concern with a dog would be that it would break the 3D printed material and then hurt the dog. But it's again going to be a filament material selection that'll help guide you as to what is the best 3D printing material for making different printing aids.
Yeah, because the thing that was also the concern was obviously depending on the plastic filament, like you're mentioning, is how absorbent is it, as well. That's not being considered. And, and in some cases, with some of the people I've talked to, it could be as bad as wood when it comes to absorption, depending on what it is. And that's the part I think becomes a little bit dangerous is we don't know things enough yet. And to start saying, oh, this is a great idea, yay, nay, I don't know. It could be, it could not be, versus just jumping in and going, hey, let's make this and do this, whatever this is. Sometimes we got to take that pregnant pause and wait a second and say, okay, let's just do a little bit more time and research on this before we start saying this is the greatest thing to use. Just because it's, like you said, the simplicity it is to make it and produce it on a scale that we haven't been able to do before in this industry. So, those that are watching and listening, it's just, I think on certain things like we've been talking about, we're really close to some really cool innovations within our industry, but we're not there enough yet with data to say this is a good idea. We're more at the stage of this is an idea, and we're seeing how it plays out in some cases. And depending on your detection dog discipline is your risk. I think in some things it's less risky, and in other things it's more risky. So that way, again, those that are watching, listening, you have to kind of decide for yourself how much risk are you willing to take when there's less data there to give you good guidance into making a decision. So
I think that the added odor that some of the 3D printing materials are made of, or the added odor from the 3D printed materials, is a concern. It could be rather significant. I mean, if you're worried about the seals on a TAD, that does make it look it's significantly worse. But I would worry more about the dog's safety in terms of, we've seen a lot of dogs aggress on things. That dog bites down on that. You have no idea how that's going to come apart and what it's going to do to the dog's mouth.
For sure. Absolutely. Now, going a slightly different direction, because you made me think of something when we were talking. As you've been producing the different training aids, one of those, like you said, is electronics detection. In the electronics media detection, like I always share, it's the same thing we're just talking about. There's a lot of things we've done based on what we thought we knew. There's been additional research that tells us, well, there's also this to think of when it comes to electronic media detection. Now that you produce stuff and you've looked into it, obviously we know in one camp, TPPO, which is like a soldering agent, was the recommended item to train on. And I did that in the very beginning. And then Stefan Peterson of the Dutch police and Dr. Ade Schoen of the same program conducted a 2-year research project. And then they were saying tantalum and PCB board had the best generalization, way better than the TPPO. Now, obviously, the TPPO camp that is still very popular is going to go, it works, because look at our dogs find stuff. And then when I switched and did what they recommended, we had really good success. We have one dog in LA that's outperforming all the other dogs that do the TPPO. But I look at part of that is good handler, good dog is in the equation as well. But I also did a third level, which is I just started training the dog to find what I wanted to find, which was SD cards, thumb drives, and just showed it that picture as often as possible. What I did discover was the dogs could tell the difference between the media items that had data on versus that were just out of the package. So I've had to share a lot of times with handlers, make sure you're training the dog to, because it depends on what the crime is. For those that are in probation or parole, they may not be allowed to have any device. But in other circumstances, we wanted the evidence on the device itself. So again, depending on what you're training the dog to do, dictates what the target is. So what do you see based on your research that is relevant or important? Should we train on just individual chemicals, or should we train on the picture of each type of device?
So I've heard two different compelling arguments on electronics. One was exactly what you said. Run your dogs on SD cards, run your dogs on thumb drives, and run them a lot. And they are successful at that. And maybe that's a perfect answer in that situation. What has worked really well for us, and we actually took your advice, was we coupled tantalum powder with a printed circuit board that has had electricity run through it. because it does smell different after it's had a charge versus prior to that. And we had a dog, I'm going to say about a year ago, that was supposedly a certified electronics dog, and I think he'd only been imprinted on TPPO. I'm not positive of that, but that's kind of what I was led to believe. And that dog walked 4 articles during a search warrant. Now, we know that the dog walked 4 articles during a search warrant because the humans found them. So later, they re-imprinted the dog on our combination of TPPO or tungsten powder and tantalum powder and printed circuit board with electricity run through it. They re-ran the dog, and obviously they had some distractors. The dog hit every single one of the articles. So There was a significant improvement in the dog's performance in doing that. And we've had other people tell us that, their dog finds all the electronics. And so we think that that's a pretty good recipe, but we're always open to new ideas and improving that.
Yeah, it is a unique, when I share it, when I'm traveling around and I tell, people that do this kind of work, I said, right now we're kind of, it's the Wild West phase, right? There was the thing that was, in this case, Connecticut State Police was the first to kind of say, hey, we reached out to our chemists say TPPO. And that was kind of like the golden rule for the longest time. And again, to this day, thanks to the nonprofit that exists that provides dogs for free to agencies, that's their same methodology. And again, there's, as anything else, it evolves. And I feel what the Dutch did was take it to the next step and then did further testing, because when the Dutch police reached out to Connecticut State Police, the way I understood it was they shared the data to the Connecticut State Police. Connecticut State Police was like, thanks, but no thanks. We've been doing it this way and we're highly successful. So kind of like you, I was working with some government 3-letter agencies in the DC area, and I put stuff out that was from my, like right out of my GoPro camera, micro SD cards and other things. And I didn't even put it out like hard to find. And there were some struggles. And I've done the exact same experiment to the dogs trained on the tantalum powder and the PCB board, and they had less struggle. So separately, not connected to the research from the Dutch, I'm doing very similar, just kind of baseline testing, odor recognition plus real world testing, and I'm seeing the same results. And again, taking the next step too, just teach the dog to find the things. I've had even better success than the TPPO part of it. Now, I do think what really happens and why the belief is the way it is on the TPPO side is this kind of depends on the dog team. The dog, how sensitive and good its nose is and how much it wants to work, along with a good handler, reading the dog well. There's enough success that it validates their argument. They're like, hey, yeah, no problem. But I also feel there isn't enough independent testing to validate the argument for the TPPO as much as there's been testing on the tantalum powder PCB board mix. It's a little out of balance based on what I've seen, but then there's that history and the human bias confirmation that kind of drives the train. And what I also see, there's another little huge curveball in the whole mix there, is when an agency gets a dog for free and the trainer who provides the dog for free says, this is the way you're going to train it, this is the way you have to certify to it, they're not going to argue it because they got the dog for free. So therefore, they're going to continue doing it that way, whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent. And your administrators are going to be like, well, we don't want to avoid our contract. We don't want to have any issues. So just shut up and color and do it this way just because it's free. Now, if they were charging for this, I think we'd have a different story going on. There'd be more, I would feel like more customers that were getting these dogs would be asking more questions or doing more. But when it's for free and it's the Wild West, this discipline is so new, it doesn't really do well to challenge or evolve if you don't want to rock the boat or change the status quo, for lack of a better term there. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. And I agree with you. I think technology itself is a tough thing to kind of keep up with, because how long are we until some other media device is the way to go? And obviously maybe we're going to be going away from certain types of devices because there's the cloud aspect. Now, obviously, criminals don't prefer cloud type activities or storage because it can be hacked into, it can be examined forensically and so forth. Where if I have a device in my possession, and let's say I get caught with it, I can protect that better. So yeah, it's a, not to go too far on a tangent or on a soapbox here, but yeah, it's a unique, detection discipline that is in its infancy, and there's a lot of moving parts to it that have to be considered. And I challenge both sides just to constantly try to find ways to be better. I don't care necessarily what way you do. I just want you to think about it and ask questions. Don't be afraid to kind of push back and say, does this really work? Or let's just to say I was that nonprofit. If I wanted to prove my way was the best, I would invite subject matter experts in to say, hey, come blindly test any team I train. I'm happy to do it. And I look forward to the data that's shared. And if I truly believe that I'm right, then it will stand for itself versus a lot of the control that I hear of you can't train there, you can't certify there, you can't do this, you can't do that. That for me brings up red flags that we should be concerned about. But again, when it's free, don't rock the boat. Let's keep doing what we're doing. So that conversation kind of goes back. I'm going to pull us back into the bomb dog world because as of New Year's Day, we had a couple incidents that occurred that were, to me, and I know to you, a little bit of a wake-up call that we need to be paying attention to the homeland and what threats that we're going to face now that we haven't ever faced before. And in the bomb dog world, we've been doing a lot of status quo. We haven't changed a ton from 9/11. We searched lots of commercial and military-grade explosives, but our true threat, especially here, is what people can get their hands on. Give me your opinion. If you were a bomb dog handler, how would you go about addressing and training for your threat? What things should we be paying attention to? What kind of effort should we be putting to when it comes to certain types of odors or odor compounds?
That's a great question. And when we do classes, I get that question often. What's it going to look like? What bomb am I looking for? How will I know I found it? And the answer to that, I wish, was something concrete, but it all comes down to knowledge, access, and resources. The knowledge that the bomber they either have, they've been trained to do, or they can get access to, like through the internet. The access they have to specific types of chemicals or materials, energetics and powders, and then what type of financial resources or, let's say, operational security type resources they have. So can they assemble these things and not be discovered? And it all depends on where they are coming from or what is in their environment. For example, in 1993, there was an attack on the World Trade Center. The bombers made urea nitrate. Okay. They're from the Middle East, where urea nitrate is very common. But in the Middle East, specifically like Iraq and Syria, they start off with urea, like it's in a fertilizer.
Mm-hmm.
And then they nitrate that. But these guys didn't have access to urea. Now, ironically, they did have almost an unlimited access to ammonium nitrate, but they didn't know how to work with ammonium nitrate. So they collected their urine and distilled the urea out of their urine to make hundreds of pounds of urea nitrate. Why did they do it that way? Well, they had the resources to do it, and that's what they had been trained to do. In the United States, most of our bombs are pipe bombs. And what do we have immediate access to? We have access to powders, and we have access to pipes. And we can buy either one of those things with no need for presenting an ID. You can buy a threaded pipe from Home Depot. You can go buy reloading powders. You can buy black powder. You can make those things. You can make black powder. And those are the most common types of devices found in the United States. Fireworks are very popular It's already pre-mixed. It's exactly right. And so the majority of the materials used for bombings in the United States, there are outliers, are going to be things like gunpowders, ammonium nitrate-based things like tannerite or exploding targets, and largely fireworks. And so the question canine people need to ask themselves when any time a bombing incident occurs is, could my dog have found that? So in the case of the fireworks and so forth that went off in Las Vegas, could your dog find that? And it would be my guess that your dog could find that all day, every day, because the materials in those fireworks are going to be things like potassium chlorate or potassium perchlorate. Your dog knows that. Black powder, your dog knows that. So yes, your dog could have found that Cybertruck gently filled with fireworks. In other cases,
I would add real quick there too is because there's actually teams that are purposely not training on fireworks because they feel the risk of alerting to fireworks in whatever format. But in this day and age, I think it's critical that I'd rather have the information that this is there and determine that it's non-hazardous, or go, wait, there's a nefarious reason why this is here and we need to be paying attention to it. There's also the caveat we have to think of is obviously in the dog training aspect, some dogs generalize really well to a mixture with a component that they know. Other dogs are like, that's close, but not what my history of reinforcement's for. But in both cases, the dogs will show behavior changes, and whether or not the handler reads that is the critical piece I think that happens. But I'm loving what you're saying is that we need to be paying attention to those things, and I think it's good to say that we can't assume that they will automatically do it, but and like your point, we could hedge our bets that there's a higher probability that they should. I also think, and you can get into this more too as you keep going with this, the volume of odor, like a large amount of fireworks versus a couple M80s and so forth.
So the question of I think ultimately what you're asking is large hide, small hide. And I think that it's important for people to work their dogs on large quantities from time to time. But of the hundreds of bombs that I worked on, 2 were not in packaging. Yeah. And they were both identical. They were 2 blocks of Russian TNT. Every other bomb I worked on was in some type of packaging and had a very small opening that would allow odor to pass through. That Cybertruck was sealed up, and the only thing you're going to get are going to be seams in the doors, vents, that sort of thing, vents to the outside. That's where odor is going to come from. In New Orleans, the devices that the attacker made were pipe bombs. And those pipe bombs were in igloo coolers. So the amount of available odor was minute. But could your dog have found that? If your dog is trained on low threshold, then I would hope that your dog could find that.
What was the composition of the pipe bombs in the New Orleans attack, and why did it fail?
It was ultimately found to be RDX. Now, where did he get RDX? Well, hopefully we can read the report and find that. It's entirely possible that he could have synthesized RDX on his own, but it was RDX, and he used remote pyrotechnic initiators. What that means is there's a remote radio frequency transmitter receiver setup that he had, and the receivers were wired into what are called electric matches. The electric matches are great for pyrotechnics, not great for explosives. And so thank God he did not know how to build a better bomb. I don't want to coach him on how to do it better or the next guy to do it better. But any case, that setup didn't work as they intended, and I think we're all grateful for that because it could have been a much worse day than what it was.
Yeah, and you're highlighting a really critical piece that I've been doing a lot of now over the past 2 years is when I go out and work with bomb dog teams, is that we're not just putting blocks of C4 behind a cabinet. We're not just putting stuff out in what we would call a typical training day. What I do is I travel around with, like you just said, I go to Lowe's, Home Depot, and I'm basically construct a majority of the device without any initiators. But I want to give that team the picture of what odor is available and the additional unique odor characteristics of, let's say, a cell phone, a pressure cooker, the pipe, all these things that a lot of handlers aren't training their dogs to encounter that threat. Now, some dogs, again, like we talked about earlier, they generalize really well. They're like, yeah, it's close enough. I'm going to show you something, or I might even fully respond. Other dogs are like, there's something different, and they may be much more subtle about that. And that comes down to that handler's skill to go, you know what, out of everywhere else, this is the only spot I saw something. But the problem with that is I see a lot of handler confidence that gets shaken when they are told, no, you're wrong, there's nothing there. So then they're less likely, they might be more likely to dismiss these really subtle changes because of how this explosive device presents itself to the dog. Where we need to be doing a lot more of is expose the dog to these different setups, to, like you just said, the cooler, like putting explosives in a cooler in a pipe. I mean, like you just said, the amount of odor coming out of those layers could be so minimal. And how often is teams training to minimal? They're training to that block, the pound, the powder poured into the canvas pouch, or, you know, we've all seen the typical setups that everybody has. And those setups look nothing like what the real world is. What would you recommend as a bomb tech that teams should be doing to create a more real picture for their dog to detect versus just throwing out substances in a really, what I would call an unnatural state for the threat that it's going to be in?
Making something that looks more like a threat device and putting your odor in it, I think is a great way of doing that. You can easily put whatever your odor is in a pressure cooker and just let it sit. I wouldn't worry about adding any other bells and whistles to it to make it look like a bomb. I would just simply focus on where the available odor is. Same thing with pipes. Probably best to consult with your bomb squad on how they feel comfortable with you assembling that. You don't want loose powders in threads. So definitely do something to contain the powders. And, again, talk with the bomb guys to, see how they feel about how that could go together. Something that sounds silly, but, tape your business card to whatever that training aid is. We've all forgotten things. Don't give the bomb guys a call and then get embarrassed when it's your K9 training aid. So
That's me. I did that before. I've been that guy. I can tell you, I had ATF show up to my place because, just like exactly like you're saying, I have no shame to admit this. It was a training night, and this is like in the early 2000s. So in this case, I was using water gel back in those days. So anyhow, I had set up a vehicle, and I'd put the case of water gel in the bed or the back of this Jeep Wrangler. But that night, I decided to take 2 sticks and put it in the trailer hitch on each side. So I was giving like this wide view of the dog of a lot of odor in that case. Anyway, it was an election night, so everybody was taking off to see who the next sheriff was. So we wanted to go to dinner, watch what was happening. I grabbed the case of the water gel and forgot about the 2 sticks that were in the trailer hitch. Days later, me and my ex at that time were traveling to see her family, so I was out of state. And then I get a call from the guy at the auto auction, and he was like, hey, did you leave any of your dummy devices anywhere? And I was like, I don't have dummy devices. Nope, not me. And I hung up the phone. And about 10 minutes later, my brain went, wait a second, hold on. Why would he call me and ask me that? So I called him back and I was like, hey, what happened? Like, why did you ask me that question? His response was, well, one of the vehicles we sold, when the guy brought it to his dealership, he found what looked like explosives in the vehicle. And I was like, by chance, what vehicle was it? He goes, oh, a white Jeep Wrangler. And I was like, ding, ding, ding. That was definitely me. So luckily enough, I knew the techs in the area where that went. So I called up the bomb tech over there and I was like, hey, by chance, did you guys respond to a call the other day about explosive device or explosive item in a vehicle? And he goes, yeah. I said, that might be me. And he said, well, what are you missing? And I said, water gel. And he goes, that would be you. So, and he goes, ironically, when we ran the VIN number on the Jeep Wrangler, it came up to a person who used to work at Kennedy Space Center. So now the FBI, ATF are all working this back. And I was like, no, it's definitely me. And right then he goes, oh, hold on, ATF's on the other line. Let's three-way this call together. So we did that. Of course, I had an ATF permit, so I was allowed to have all that stuff. But the long story short was, like you just said, it's super embarrassing. I had to get a letter. They had to basically say, don't do that again. You could put your license in jeopardy if you are an idiot and you keep leaving your explosives everywhere. But you're absolutely right how critical it is to label some of your things, especially when it looks real. And it's just Murphy's Law that stupid stuff happens. And whether it be on our end or the dumb luck of somebody just, when you're not paying attention or not in the area, comes up and sees that and then initiates a whole response because of, they don't know, it looks suspicious. It looks whatever, like it is. And it gets spun up pretty quickly. And before you know it, your dog training gets highly limited because your administration doesn't trust that we're smart enough not to make these mistakes.
And that's where I'm not going to plug up. Okay, shameless plug. That's where things like odor prints come into play. And that's
correct.
If you lose it, it sucks to be out, $69, but nobody gets called and nobody cares because it cannot detonate. It cannot cause a problem. As in, it's not, it's a safe, easy solution. But, if you're going to make your own training aids, whether it's with potassium chlorate, which is not an explosive, or ammonium nitrate, again, not an explosive, or even with powders like gunpowder or like smokeless powder or black powder, it's a good idea to tape something on there and also to have an accountability. So keep track of your training aids, have them numbered, those kinds of things, have them all in the same case. Just make sure that you know where they are and know at the end of the day, do I have all my training aids? We could spin yarns about the number of times people have left things on buses or planes or pallets. It just happens all the time. But any case, try not to be the person that causes a response to something that's benign.
Yeah,
in any
don't
case,
be like me.
Yes, try to make these things in a I call it a threat configuration or weaponized environment where you limit the amount of odor. One of the things we try to do with handlers, we have a pipe that does have target odor. It's not a pipe bomb. It doesn't have an actual explosive in it, but it is a pipe. It does have a hole in the top. And we do have something that looks like time fuse coming out of the end. And we place it in an area where it's not obvious, but it's also not hidden. And we ask handlers to conduct their search. And the test is twofold. One is, does the handler recognize things in the environment, such as, oh, there's a pipe bomb in that corner. I'm not going to do a search. There's no need for me to proceed further. Great. Fantastic. You're paying attention. Now, we'll see if your dog can find it too. Those are ways that you can kind of incorporate all the different environmental conditions that you need to be aware of. Someone asked me the other day about using a coverman or having another person
spotter, right?
with a spotter with the K9 team. I think it's a fantastic idea as a bomb tech moving in a tactical situation. If we thought there were booby traps, my job was to basically be the dog team, the guy that finds the booby traps. My sole focus was on finding booby traps, not on human threat. So I had a guy behind me, my coverman, who would look for human threat. Likewise, when running a K9 team, if you're working your dog, you can't always pay attention to everything in the environment. Trying to pick up on those subtle cues that your dog's giving you. You may not see the pipe bomb. You may not see the board that you're about to trip over, or the trip wire that you're about to activate. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a great idea to have a spotter or a coverman walk with you and pay attention to things. Also, if you're dealing with people or you're going through crowds, they can do a good job of helping to fend off. And everybody wants to pet the dog. What's the dog doing? And all they're doing is distracting the handler. So this person has an opportunity to counter deflect and allow the K9 team to do their job.
Absolutely. I actually, for those watching, listening, there's quite a few now that have got the low explosives webinar that I did, and then the attachment I made with all the files of things that are obviously you can source openly, but also things I've written personally. I wrote various TTPs for reactive response versus proactive handling, to include spotter, what we just talked about. For everything that you just listed was a lot of the reasons why I say use a spotter. And then in most cases, if you don't have access to a tech to be your spotter, then another dog handler is a good choice to be a spotter, because the other dog handler is probably less likely to sit there and watch your dog versus somebody who's just another patrol person or another deputy on scene that's just going with you. A lot of them who are not dog handlers just stare at your dog while you're watching your dog and you're missing threats. So you need to have the other person who's your spotter have really good situational awareness, paying attention to their environment, calling out stuff to you for exactly everything you just said. But to do that means we have to train for that. We have to start implementing those types of scenarios into our training much sooner, which is, again, some of those things that I share in those files on the website when you get the low explosive webinar, is to how to create those things. Because, again, you and I both know a lot of times when it comes to training, it's training to put odor out, not training for what we call FMP, full mission profile, where we're looking at, can we do this job as if we were doing it for real, and preparing ourselves for that versus just doing it for real when it happens for real, which unfortunately I think sometimes happens a little too frequently, as opposed to what should be tested and vetted and fleshed out in training, so we're not, figuring it out on the fly. And in that topic, when it comes to setting up training odor aspects, and like you said, based on what resources are available to the average person who may have bad intentions, what is your feeling about creating like an odor mixture? So let's just say, like you said, take potassium chlorate and black powder, but putting it in a way that allows the dog to smell that mixture versus doing what happens far too often, which is I'm only training on one. I'm not really putting them in close proximity to each other to put that together, because I know this leads up to a new device that you have that helps us do that same thing. But talk about what you can do in just materials that you have, and then also share us a little bit about the odor fusion device.
So pairing odors that you could find together, I think, is probably a good idea. And the two that you mentioned that's probably the best pairing that I can think of, in that you're going to have black powder and either potassium chlorate or potassium perchlorate present in fireworks. So I don't think that's a bad idea at all. I think in other cases, it may be a bit problematic if they're just things that would never be together. Trying to think what would be an example of that.
I'll say,
Perhaps
what pairings would you say to do? What would be good ones to do? That
so,
would
for
mimic.
example, so we have to do things like RDX, PETN, TNT, and nitroglycerin, right? Because that basically covers what we see in terms of military and commercial explosives. RDX is the primary energetic that's in C4, although C4 has not been used in a terrorist incident since like 1976. Does that mean you don't need to train your dog on it? No, you should. Your dog needs to know RDX. Your dog needs to know PETN. It's in dead cord and sheet explosives, which I don't think you're ever going to see in a device. However, Semtex, 3 of the 4 variations of Semtex are different ratios of RDX and PETN. Semtex is a plastic explosive of choice overseas. So that doesn't mean that just because they see it in Europe or in Africa or the Middle East, that somebody doesn't try to send a Semtex device to the United States. And considering that those are made up of both RDX and PETN, that's a good pairing. PETN and TNT are found in penalite boosters. Probably not going to see that, but if you're going to mix 2 high explosives, that might be another one. Nitroglycerin is in smokeless powder, but really not much anything else except for dynamite. And nitroglycerin has such a strong odor, I can almost find it without a dog. But other things like ammonium nitrate and RDX, that's found in some of the commercial explosives. Like, most commercial explosives are going to be ammonium nitrate based. They're going to have some other type of fuel present, like in emulsions. Water gel has a little bit of RDX in it, along with ammonium nitrate. So those are good combinations for explosives. We made the Odor Fusion Max, which is a a manifold that allows for 4 TADs to be screwed into it at the same time. And each TAD would be loaded with some other type of material. So you could add 2 or more materials. And ideally for things like arson detection or for narcotics, that's where the Odor Fusion Max is probably best suited. I think that you could probably add, if you wanted to make some complex odors for explosives, it will come with all those other odors. So for example, Poor Man C4 is either paraffin wax or petroleum jelly and potassium chlorate. Well, you'll have those odors in that kit. So your dog can experience that complex mixture of those 2 odors without mixing those 2 chemicals together. And now you have a homemade explosive that you have to deal with. So for fuel oxidizer mixtures, the Odor Fusion Max is great because you can do those complex mixtures of fuels and oxidizers such as hydrogen peroxide, ammonium nitrate, and potassium chlorate with the fuels. And then we have a kit for narcotics that have the various narcotics to include marijuana as a distractor. And then we have masking and cutting agents that are commonly found with those narcotics. And again, it's something that you place individual odors in the TAD, and then load it into the Odor Fusion Max manifold. The odors rise up, then they go down to the bottom of the device, mix, and then emit out of the hole in the center. And we'll post pictures on our Facebook and some videos on how to use it.
Now, out of the resources that people can get, what is your, again, going into the pipe bomb, pressure cooker bomb, if I get my hands on the powder? So first I want to hit something real quick, because people don't know this, which is sometimes surprising. Can you explain the difference between single base smokeless powder and double base smokeless powder? Because as we both know, everybody hyper focuses on double base, but you have single base, and some just assume that, well, if it hits double base, it'll hit single base. Why is that something that we should be concerned with, and what's the difference?
So single base is nitrocellulose and a binding agent and a stabilizer. Everything builds off of nitrocellulose. So there is another single base. It's called a single base in the reloading industry. I consider it a double base because the other component, which is DNT, dinitrotoluene, is an energetic. In the reloading industry, it's considered a burn rate moderator. However, it's an energetic, just like TNT. It's just dinitrotoluene as opposed to trinitrotoluene. So I consider it a double base, but the other mixture for double base is nitrocellulose and nitroglycerin. There is a triple base. I'm not going to go into triple base because it's an artillery propellant. You'll never see it. If you see that, then there's a military working dog that's also looking for it too.
Yeah. So this kind of goes into, so then now I have the powders, the smokeless powder or black powder or Pyrodex. And then I have the different oxidizers we've talked about, ammonium nitrate, potassium nitrate, which is going to be obviously the black powder, and then the potassium chlorate. And what used to go around was sodium chlorate. Would you, let's just say through the odor fusion device or just putting them close together, what would you do to prep a dog team for these types of potential hazard device mixtures that their regular Joe can get their hand on?
So potassium chlorate is found in match heads. Match heads also have sulfur in a paste. You can make a bomb out of match heads, obviously, but potassium chlorate mixed with aluminum powder or magnesium powder makes what's called flash powder. I've worked on a lot of bombs. I've made a lot of explosives. There isn't anything that scares me more than fireworks. I do not like dealing with fireworks. They are extraordinarily dangerous in terms of friction sensitivity, electrostatic discharge sensitivity. They just so easy to make a mistake with fireworks. They blow up all the time by accident, even in the manufacturing process. So please do not make anything with aluminum powder. It's just not going to be a good day for you. So you can put potassium chlorate in a container and aluminum powder in a separate container. And it gives your dog an idea of what flash powder is like. If you don't have access to fireworks, please do not mix them together. Please do not go to a fireworks distributor and ask for those two substances unless you have a federal explosive license or you work for a law enforcement agency. They will put you on a list and they will blackball you and they will never sell you anything again. So don't go to a fireworks distributor and ask for those two things. You can ask for potassium chlorate, that's fine, but don't ask for aluminum powder because they imagine they're going to make all the M80s in the world.
Yeah. And the tannerite is basically ammonium nitrate and aluminum powder, and when mixed together is now very, very shock sensitive, which
it is shock sensitive. So the exploding targets kind of come in two varieties. One is ammonium nitrate prills with aluminum powder, and that is, let's just call that hunting rifle sensitive. And then there are those that are considered 22 caliber sensitive. That is potassium chloride and aluminum powder. That's flash powder. If you have any friends, any redneck friends like I do who want to play with those, those kits come with a pink bag. That's an anti-static bag so that you can mix the stuff up. I wouldn't mess with it from the beginning, but if they insist on doing it, use the anti-static bags because people have actually blown up just mixing the materials together. But yeah, aluminum powder and ammonium nitrate, that's tannerite in the right ratio. And in some states you can't have it. Some states you can have both of the components. You can't mix them together. So it's some dangerous stuff. Now you mentioned before sodium chlorate. Sodium chlorate is a substitute it is a very aggressive oxidizer. However, it's very hygroscopic. It's not used in pyrotechnics. We've actually had it clump up as we're pouring it. I don't recommend that you run your dog on it. Does it hurt if you already have it and you're ready to bring your dog? Probably not. It's not going to take anything away, but it's probably not going to be used as an oxidizer for bombs. But if you have it, it's on your requirements list, knock yourself out. But
yeah, and like you're mentioning, a lot of these things are also these chemicals that are in things like you said, the match head, stump remover, so on and so forth. So we have to be aware that sometimes what we are training with could be benign by itself, but that shouldn't it shouldn't make you avoid it. It just makes you aware of what your dog is actually paying attention to and being observant in your environment and so forth. Now, this leads into a little bit of the peroxide-based explosives, your TATP, HMTD, and then after those few incidences that we had around the world, that became a big focus for a lot of teams was training on TATP and HMTD. Speak a little bit about that kind of device and what the risk is and the probability of those types of chemicals being used in threats in the United States in this day and age.
So TATP and HMTD, we kind of think of them as being these new internet sensations and, oh my gosh, look what the college kids discovered. When in reality, a guy named Wolfenstein actually came up with TATP back in the 1800s. So TATP's been around for a long time. I don't know exactly when HMTD was discovered, but we understood that these things are very easily synthesized explosives. You don't need any special training to do this. You don't need a license or anything like that. I don't recommend that you try to make any of these things. If you screw it up, it can detonate in your face, and it's just not worth it. HMTD has been used in the London subway bombing. TATP has been used extensively in the Middle East. And TATP is also, I guess, a fan favorite of university students who want to make explosives. There was a kid, I think in Oklahoma, who had a backpack full of TATP. He tried to gain entrance into a sporting event and was denied. he was sitting on a bench outside the stadium and blew up. And we don't know if it was suicide or if he just didn't handle the TATP properly, but he detonated.
Yeah.
They are extremely sensitive and very easy to make. It is possible to desensitize TATP to the point of being, to the point of having the same sensitivity of PEPN. There are people that know how to do this. I'm not going to tell anybody how to do it. But it can be used as a main charge. But more often than not, HMTD and TATP are going to be used in blasting caps. So unless you're dealing with an area where there's a specific threat or you live near a university, I don't recommend that you spend a lot of time focusing on TATP and HMTD, because if it is used in a blasting cap, that blasting cap is going to be in the material that your dog is already imprinted on.
Yeah.
The TATP and HMTD are just a bonus.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So this is something that I think is good to share, because we're talking about components right now. Explain to viewers and listeners, what is the explosive train, and as a bomb dog handler, why it's important to know what the explosive train is, so that way under your situational awareness, you might see one of these components and be heads up and make a decision from there. So just tell us what it is, and as a bomb dog handler, what are some things to pay attention to as situational awareness, identifying the explosive train?
So if your dog alerts on something, or you find something that has, there's an acronym called PIES. It stands for Power Supply, Initiator, Explosive, and Switch. That's not exactly the way the explosive train goes. It starts with a power supply. It goes through a switch to an initiator. An initiator is another word for a blasting cap. And then on into the main charge. So if you locate wires, batteries, a switch that's out of place. And when I say wires, what I'm talking about are wires that are not neatly paired. So if you think about appliance wire or USB cabling, all those things are going to be very neatly paired together. But if you just have a stray wire that you can see in a package, in a bag, or whatever, that's odd. If you find batteries, think about how many things just have batteries out in the open. Not too many things would just have a battery pack. And then weird unpaired wires. Those things are suspicious. And then your dog alerts to it. Well, take note of all the things that you saw and pass that on to the bomb tech and go on and do the next thing. But it's very important to understand that once something is deemed suspicious, and I don't want to insult anybody, but as a bomb technician, I don't care if your dog's sad or not. You could run 100 dogs, and if none of them sit, and you tell me that I saw wires in what looked like a power supply going into some type of other container, I'm going to have to assume that it's a bomb. So it's already suspicious. Once it's suspicious, there's no need to keep running dogs on it. So go on and do the next thing.
Yeah.
Go look for secondaries, and how about clear a path for the bomb guys? And maybe think about where they would set up their command post and clear that. The provisional IRA in the UK would set something up as a decoy, or as something that would be suspicious, and then they would consider where the command post would be set up, and then that's where they'd set up their real device, and they would attack the bomb techs. So your job is very important, and it's a continuity kind of thing where you find something and then prepare for the next wave of guys to come in and do their job.
So that brings up the next question I have for you, which is, as a bomb tech, if a dog handler has been deployed, they're working, they get an indication or an area of concern, what is important information as a tech that you expect to hear, or you need to hear from a bomb dog handler, so that way you can go do your job? What are the things, like if bomb handler just comes out and goes, yeah, I got an alert over there, we both know that that's limited information. But as a tech, if a handler comes up to you, and what are the things that you want to hear from the handler?
So you want to hear things like, what did you think that your dog alerted on? Was it, did you mark it? So for example, if there are a number of bags, did you mark which bag specifically? I know you did a podcast recently on things that K9 teams should have, and various types of markers clearing a path and identifying specifically what the item is that's suspicious. But if it's something that's relatively isolated, like you walk down the street and you found one garbage can that was suspicious, okay, well, my dog alerted to it. Well, you probably looked in it. Did you see anything else that looked suspicious? What are the things about it that made it suspicious to you? Again, thinking about stray wires. So, for example, the pressure cooker bombs that were used in the Boston Marathon bombing, those pressure cookers had to have a wire coming out of them. Otherwise, that metal pressure cooker creates what's called a Faraday cage. And so a signal can't go through that metal. So there had to be an antenna wire that came out of that pressure cooker, unless they just got really lucky. So there had to be an antenna wire that came out. And they may have had that antenna wire stick out of the back as well. And you may be able to see that. I worked on a roadside bomb once, and I could see the device itself, and some wires went into the ground. And when I searched where those wires went to, on the other side of where obviously something had been buried, there was just this stray blue wire, and that happened to be the antenna that went up into a bush. And so just pay attention to those subtle little things that are just out of place, like specifically wires and batteries, or is there an external switch? Is there a light next to the switch? Is there something that would give you it doesn't look right. It doesn't fit with what you see. And switches on bags and so forth. Nobody has a switch on a bag. Nobody has a switch on a box. But wires are a good one.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Which then leads to this. So as me and you talked about before we went on the podcast, obviously the Sean Ryan show had a couple guests on now talking about this invisible bomb. And you and I talked about that. And the way it was described on that podcast was the invisible bomb was the dogs weren't able to detect the explosive. And a lot of information has been kind of gone over in the sense of, oh, is it a chemical that dogs aren't trained to detect? Is it a mixture the dogs aren't used to? And you brought up something that I thought was really important that hasn't been talked about, which was it's actually how it's constructed to reduce or eliminate odor emitting from it. And that's its true advantage. So explain what that is and how somebody would go about, in the sense of as dog handlers, there's only so much we can do. And if someone uses this kind of method, so talk about what they're doing and what we have to pay attention to as a bomb dog handler, considering that it might not be able to smell it.
So in terms of explosives, are there explosives out there that can be synthesized that perhaps your dog doesn't know? Of course. Is it likely? Probably not. But we're learning more and more every day about, let's just say, the breadth of different types of homemade explosives that can be used and whether or not the dogs will alert to them. And there will be more information that'll come out about that. The thing that makes this invisible bomb a significant issue for K9 teams specifically is, when we talked about the odor prints, I said that you have the training aid in 2 metallized Mylar bags. And you're not talked before about storage and handling of your odors and putting things in either glass or metal. And why glass or metal? It's because it's inorganic. And I'm not talking about organic like at the grocery store. I mean inorganic as in it doesn't have a carbon atom. And therefore, those molecules of metal and glass fit together better and don't allow odors to pass through them. So you wouldn't keep a pickle in your refrigerator in a Ziploc bag. Otherwise, everything smells like pickle. It's in a glass jar with a metal lid. Same thing with storing your odors, right? Well, the bad guys can also conceal their odors using the same idea. And they could create any kind of container they want. And if they coat that or seal it all up with silicone rubber, silicone being the key component to glass, they seal it with silicone rubber. Well, now you've made essentially an odor barrier that can't be penetrated. So if they were to coat, let's say, a pipe bomb or some other containment device wholly with silicone rubber, no odor passes through that. Now uh, it looks messy. It does have an odor of the solvent that was used to extrude the silicone rubber. So if it was put together recently, there's a chance that your dog would show a change of behavior just because it's a weird odor that the dog probably hasn't experienced. It's really strong. So I've talked with some handlers who've run on trainings that have been coated with silicone rubber within a day or so, and their dogs did show a change of behavior. They didn't go to their trained final alert, but they did show a change of behavior. And this is where the handler being cued in to things that look odd. So if somebody coated a container with silicone rubber, that's unusual. And it has wires coming out of it. So that's going to require some further investigation. So the silicone rubber is their methodology for trying to conceal odor. I try not to give too much of a complete answer because then we're kind of educating bad guys on TATPs. But
Correct.
there are ways that we win every time, based on their inability to do it properly.
So in that conversation that we had about all these things and the mysterious thing came up the topic of R-salt as a explosive component. Explain what R-salt is and educate those of us who don't know what that is.
R-salt is a homemade explosive that is very similar to RDX. There are actually only 3 oxygen atoms different between them. It's not clear as to whether or not they're close enough that dogs will alert to R-salt, but we're going to find out the answer to that. I wouldn't be overly concerned because R-salt is, I won't say that it's difficult to make, but it's not easy to make. And sourcing the materials is a challenge. Mm-hmm. So the initial report out of New Orleans was that the material found in those pipe bombs was R-salt. And we're working to find all the answers relative to K9 detection and response to R-salt. But you can actually make R-salt and convert it to RDX and back again. To the best of my knowledge, R-salt has not been used in a terrorist incident, and that's based off of a DIA unclassified book about homemade explosives. But there are other people who have said that, yes, R-salt has been used. We're going to learn more about it, but I wouldn't get too worked up about R-salt yet.
Yeah, it was interesting because Dr. Nathan Hall made a statement too about, like you just said, something that may be similar, like you said, in this case, 3 molecules different kind of thing. And he brought up a point too. He goes, yeah, there's truth to that. But he goes, I can change the direction of a carbon atom and just in one chemical and make it change from smelling like shoe leather to spearmint. So he was like, we have to, like you just said, keep a critical eye, not freak out, but also not assume. And just like you're saying, it's really important as more information comes out to better educate us on how to address that potential threat. So what I want the viewers and listeners to kind of consider is there's going to be truths to both sides of something in the sense of it could be connected, it could be easier, but there's also could be very different. Until we know more information, again, go back to that pregnant pause. Let's wait a minute, see what comes up from the information, and then adjust as we need to adapt to whatever potential threat there is in this. We're going
to be making R-salt training aids because just because it hasn't been used doesn't mean it wouldn't be used. So it will be available. If nothing else, you can gain more confidence if your dog does know this odor in addition to RDX. But as I said in the very beginning, it's knowledge, access, and resources. So is it possible to make R-salt? Sure. But it's a whole hell of a lot easier to go get tannerite. Is it possible to synthesize RDX or TATP? Yes, but I can also go get fireworks and be in business in a matter of hours.
Yeah.
So it just depends on how much work they want to go to and what their end goal is. I can get a lot of fireworks. I can get a lot of tannerite. I can't make a lot of arsalt right away.
Yeah. No, it's an important point. We have to take all these things into consideration. So I'll end the podcast with this question here, because with you being a bomb tech, this is a good one. And we get this right now all the time, especially in the commercial bomb dog industry. What is your thought and feeling on a bomb dog that is also a firearms detection dog? As a tech, what is your concern? And as just being experienced in this industry, what are your thoughts on a bomb dog that is also, quote unquote, a firearms detection dog?
Well, it's kind of a double-edged sword. Um, a friend had a bomb dog that was trained on gunshot residue alert to the trunk of a vehicle in a uh, parking lot of a federal building. Now that incident could have unraveled a number of different ways. It just so happened that they were able to run the plate and knew that the person was an employee. They brought the employee out. They said, yeah, I had a gun in the trunk of the car. I know I can't take it in the building. Left it out here. Problem solved. But it could have also gone a different way. And that person could have been a visitor and wasn't associated with that building. And now did the dog alert to the possible presence of shell casings because the guy's an avid shooter or an actual gun, or does he have a bomb? And it's not easy to get into the trunk of a car without causing a little bit of damage. So if they thought that that was a bomb, it's going to escalate very quickly. So now I'm not really giving you an answer, but I can tell you that I can't, unless the dog can communicate in some way or articulate in some way that it was responding to the presence of gunshot residue versus an explosive, I would have to assume the worst, that it's an explosive.
Yep. You're saying exactly what I usually share, which is, okay, can you do it? Yeah. But when your dog indicates what is action on find, you can't just say that, oh, in this case, it's a gun. Now, are there certain instances where you definitely know this? I'm using my dog to go find, like you just said, some type of GSR component, whether it be shell casings, a discarded firearm. But when you're in a proactive or reactive situation as a bomb dog handler, you now have opened yourself up to potential indications that are still within the target of this dog, what it's been trained to do, but that could actually redirect resources to something else that's not what we're looking for in that moment, and increase a significant risk to those that are dealing with that, when the actual thing that was truly hazardous, the actual explosive device, is over there. And that's a risk that a lot of times I don't feel comfortable with. Now, in a law enforcement segment, there's plenty of, as we both know, lots of police dogs that have done both, or they'll say they do both. The difference in the cop world versus the commercial security world is the law enforcement world can direct assets really quickly to address something. And I say really quickly is relative, of course. But there's maybe access to the techs that are already on scene because it's an event that's going on. So if the dog indicates to, let's say, a trash can, the techs can quickly do something to determine which way we're going with this. But that commercial bomb dog team that's with, Snoopy's detection company, their dog indicates, because I want to tell my client, hey, look, I'm going to charge you this much money because our dogs find guns and bombs. We're not just bomb dog handlers. It is driven by a profit-focused mentality versus a threat-focused mentality. And that's the difference, where I say, okay, on the law enforcement side, there's resources at their disposal that can be employed in a quicker way than the commercial side. In the commercial side, we're doing it for profits, not so much that we really care about the logistics and threat-based aspects of it all. And that's where you have to make decisions. I can tell everybody, you can, but the bigger thing that I've over the years that I've learned, and thanks to the research I did with Paolo on firearms, was that the assumption was, it's automatic. If you trained on black or smokeless powder or Pyrex, you have a gun dog. And what we obviously learned was that's actually highly inaccurate. It's the GSR the dogs are paying attention to. And ironically, though, that belief was, well, I've trained on the powders, they'll find guns. When they've thrown guns out in training, the dogs have acknowledged it because it's the thing that doesn't belong there. And with enough reinforcement, when the dogs have acknowledged the gun, the handlers paid the the dog ended up learning GSR anyway, as the byproduct of that. So it's just it's important to have these discussions. There are risks, and I just try to steer the commercial world in the direction of, how about just have gun dogs in your team and bomb dogs in your team, and it's a cleaner output. But I understand it's a commercial world, and they want to, let's cut costs as much as possible. And if I know half the commercial people, if they could put guns, bombs, and drugs all on one dog, they totally would. They would absolutely do it because it's profitable to them. The only reason why they do it is because they get shunned enough being, stupid in that way.
I don't necessarily want to defend them, but I can see in certain circumstances, if, for example, you got a venue that doesn't allow explosives or weapons, that's what you do. You do contract work to prevent guns and bombs from coming into that venue. Then I think that it's, probably a good idea. Those are prohibited items. You can't have those. But,
yeah, and like you're saying, what do we do when the dog alerts? Is the person coming through with
right.
X or Y? That's the part that's scarier when it comes to the commercial world, just because many of these companies don't have the resources to address what you just talked about. This is how I would recommend it. If firearms and obviously explosive devices are prohibited in here, then I'm going to use obviously technology to help me with the firearms piece. Whether it be the magnetometers or some of the new things like Ingressotech has and things like that are really better or really good at identifying weapons on people or in bags, etc. And the bomb dogs are the bomb dogs. And like you said, I would, again, I get it. It doesn't make financial sense, but if I truly had the desire to keep the public safe, and that was the real reason I was there, I wasn't there just for the money. I was there to get paid, but also do the job appropriately. I have my gun dogs, I have my bomb dogs, I have my security in depth, I have these other resources that are there or technology pieces that make it more well-rounded. And we all know there's nothing that's 100%, and there's nothing, it's not an always or a never kind of thing. There's no perfect, there's flawed handlers, flawed dogs. But our goal is to mitigate that risk as much as possible. And in my opinion, we need to mitigate that risk as smartly as possible. And we can't let the dollar drive our policies and or our safety measures, because I want to do it as cheap as possible, charge my client as much as possible, and therefore I'm profitable as possible. If I really am doing this right, I need to do it the right way in the commercial world and separate some of these things and do it versus trying to throw everything into under one coat of fur, per se, a dog, to say that it does all these things because I'm just trying to cut costs. So on that note, we can, first of all, thank you for your time coming on here and sharing all this information with us. It's obviously been a very enlightening episode. This is a lot of people that listen to us because we've always share you guys as a sponsor of our show for everything that you've done for us. But let us know, how do we find you? How do we get a hold of you if we have more questions? And where do we purchase all these things that we've talked about?
So you can go to our website, pre-exp.com. That's pre-exp.com. Precision Explosives. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram. Chrissy keeps up with our recent activities and sharing information about things like our assault, or today we shared something about a car accident involving a K9 team, of all things, in a high-speed chase in Cleveland County, North Carolina. And the cruiser that the K9 team was in was damaged very badly. It caught fire. Fortunately, some Good Samaritans helped the dog and the handler out of the vehicle, but the vehicle burned. And we posted something important about, if that K9 team had explosives training needs, like specifically like larger quantities, pound quantities, those explosives are not the same. They have become significantly more sensitive. So we try to post those kinds of things on Facebook and Instagram, and we answer. If I'm awake and you post or ask a question, I'll answer you as quickly as possible.
Oh yeah, I can attest to that. I've hit you up on a few occasions, and you're pretty on it with getting back to me. So thank you for being a great resource for our community and providing information to us. And for everybody listening, thank you for tuning in to K9s Talking Sense, where it's okay to be nosy.